Rev, I believe we're ready for a word.
Well, you know what? If we're ready for a word, then allow me to then move us into that direction. Lord, remove this vessel out of the way and allow your Holy Spirit, Father, to speak. Allow, Father, the ears that will hear and the hearts and the minds, Father, that they may understand, and the hands, Father, that have to move forward. Father, whatever the sense is that is required to move, Lord, allow your word, Father, to move into the heart and change a heart and even the vessel that is speaking. Today's word comes from the book of Galatians, the 6th chapter, the 3rd verse. And I titled the sermonette, Your Worth Tested. And then parenthetically, I'm saying, who scores your test? Sometimes we score our own test, others score the test for us. But I just leave that to kind of talk about what your worth is. Tested. Book of Galatians, chapter 6, verse 3 reads, "Be sure to do what you should, for then you will enjoy the personal satisfaction of having done your work well, and you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else." The book of Galatians 6 and 3. Now, to kind of give a context of the backdrop of this, where is Galatia? Well, Galatia, if you are familiar with your maps, it is today's Turkey. So if you kind of know where Turkey is located on the map, then you really know where Galatia is. And at that time, it was about 20,000 people strong. And Galatia kind of reached two ports. So you had the Black Sea, which would have been north. So the southern border of the Black Sea would have been a border for Galatia. And then if you, a northern border, but it would have been the southern part of the Black Sea. And then you had the Mediterranean Sea to the south, which was there. So you've got two portal cities. And so when people travel, right, they travel typically to a port. And so you have about 20,000 people. So you have varying people that make up this piece of property called Galatia. And these then became, they called them Gauls instead of, Galatians, but that was kind of the name. But I wanted to just give you a view of where this is located and where this is happening, and why sometimes you have to kind of help people understand that you don't necessarily need to measure yourself and your worth because of someone else, but you got to know what you're doing and then find satisfaction in what you're doing. Oftentimes, if there's little to no satisfaction in what we do, then the point of doing it becomes lost, if that does make sense, because you just didn't get much satisfaction out of doing it. A lot of that kind of talks about our lives. And so if in our lives we have things that are challenging and we're challenged in our lives to deal with certain things, then the question becomes, what is it that I've managed to mess up? Or what did somebody else mess up in me? And you just need to know what the truth is about whatever those statements or comments are about you. You may not have messed up anything, or you may have messed up a whole lot of things. But that's not the end of that story. Some may say, well, can I start my life over again as a child? And is that the better thing to do, just start all over? But sometimes the people, when they want to start over, they can't, because they say, well, how can I even be born again? How can I even start over again? I'm in my 20s, or I'm in my 30s or 40s or 50s, or I'm older than that. And how can I start over again? How can I get footing back into a life that I've well lived, but I recognize as I look, there's some things I need to do. I need to improve. Well, we all have many chapters in our lives. Isn't the whole point of this thing being self-aware? No, self-awareness is really kind of a simple thing. If you think about it, it's basically knowing who you are. It's basically knowing what makes you tick. Not the person next to you, not the person in front of the back, but it's what makes you tick. It's what you prefer. You know, what physical things in this life can you use and control? What things can you deploy? What are your tendencies? All of these things are part of your own personal self-awareness. Now, this is you. This isn't somebody else, but this is just you. This is who you are. When it boils down to that piece, the question becomes, what is your perception of you, and what is your perception of the world? Now, those things you got to guard closely, because when you open them up, and people kind of try to manipulate those things, then if you have the tendency, then it may allow you to be manipulated in a way in which doesn't bode well for you, but it bodes well for the person that is testing and seeing how they can test and where they can kind of penetrate. And, well, you know, you don't have any borders up to protect yourself, so I can just walk right over and then do that. Now, you may not think that people think like that or would do those kind of things. Well, my beloved, they do. They do. You can be tested beyond the point of almost breaking. You can be tested to the point where you feel like you're broken. Have you ever broken a glass in the house, and then you tried to make sure you cleaned it up, and you sweep and you look and you sweep and you look, and you think you've got all of the pieces of glass up? You walk in the kitchen or you walk in whatever room, and you know what will happen? Your foot will find the piece you missed. If there are other people in your house, you're well to tell them, hey, listen, glass got broken in there, make sure you got your shoes on, because the shoes will protect you. But then sometimes we forget and we go right in there barefoot and we find a piece that we missed. We'll talk about how all of this can be put together, but suffice it to say that this is a representation of our lives and how we are to be tested and how we can be tested. We can be that piece of broken glass that has shattered all over the floor, and we want to understand, how do we put that back together? Is that even possible for us to put that back together? We'll talk about that as well. But let's talk about the pieces of the tests that we deal with each and every day, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, maybe daily, maybe hourly. But these are tests that you go through each and every day. And how we pass those tests? Well, individually, it's what we know. We said earlier that, you know, life will test you, but it doesn't necessarily give you the script. My beloved, it does give us some inferences to how things should be. You would know how you would want to be treated. So by inference, you would know how to treat someone else. And such are these tests that we're going to talk about. Now, these tests you can look at conversely. You can look at them as a test, but think of them as what I might call the fruits of the Spirit. Because once you understand where you are with these tests that I'm going to talk about, then you'll quickly realize, okay, so here's a piece that I need to deal with. And we'll talk about that as well. So put your finger on that. What about the test of love? Now, we have the test of love that is talked about, and for those that think about it for a moment, there are some people who will tell you that they're a Christian, but then they hate certain groups of people, or they hate the color of skin of certain people. The Bible clearly tells them, you're walking in darkness. You don't have a clue because you're still in darkness. And how can you say one thing, but at the other, then profess and do something different? So if you find yourself that when you're tested and you talk about love within your heart, well, think about where you are on that continuum of that test. Another piece is the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That's the love chapter. I would invite you to read, there's 13 verses in that chapter, and I would invite you to read all 13 and test yourself against that. And then you'll grow to know and to understand, well, I could use a little work here, or I could use a little bit of work there. There's the test of hope that we all deal with. And you'll find in the book of Romans where there's talking about, it says that's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something that is good. So whenever we find ourselves in a position that isn't all that great, it's not all that great, and you are just trying to figure out how to hold on, well, there's hope there, but there is a test. Can you really wait it out? The same can be said with the test of joy. Now, remember that there were folk that set out in the desert for 40 years trying to figure out to get to a promised land. Now, in the span of that time, if you were born into that, you spent into your 40s trying to get somewhere. So you may not have known anything about it. Now, say the same thing for a person in their 20s that spent 40 years dealing with that. Then there's hope that we're going to get there. But, are you really sustaining that hope? And then think about the same thing for a person born in their 40s that were in their 40s and they started that journey. If they made it to the years of 80 and above, they would have to have hope that, Lord, even if I don't see it, I know it's going to happen. There is a test. And every time we're tested as people, there's a reason for that test. It could be you, it could be the next generation, it could be you passing that along. There then is other tests that we can deal with. There's a test of pain, right? So, Pam, I hope you didn't stumble on your foot. But there's the test of peace. There's a test of patience. And you know what happens? If you have patience, or if you're tested patience, if that is tested in you, conversely, faith will be tested as well. Because James 1:3 says, knowing this, that your trying of your faith works patience. So it takes patience to have faith. Talking about kindness, there's that golden rule, right? Do unto others as others do unto you. And that's kind of an interesting statement for a person that has a hard heart, or a person that, let's say that the way they look at life is a lot different than how you would look at life. And so at the end of the day, if a person treated you the same way you treat them, well, is that something that you would embrace, or is that something that you would say, well, this isn't the best? But again, it's a test. Then there's a test of goodness. There's a test of faithfulness. Now think about faithfulness for a moment. If you were Abraham and you had a son whose name was Isaac, and your God told you to, well, you know what? I need you to get some wood. I need you to go to the altar, and I need you to make an offering. And then all of a sudden you turn around and, you being Isaac go, well, I get the wood, I get the offering, I get the burn, but where's the lamb? And your dad looks at you and says, well, no, you are the lamb. And now, all of a sudden, you have to think about faithfulness, that the Father is willing to do an act to offer his son because he's been told. And he starts the process of binding them up and starting that to be told by an angel, hey, it's okay. There's a ram in the bush. That's what you will sacrifice and not him. So let the boy go. And an angel is telling him this. But the fact is, his test was, would he carry out, or would he want to carry out, faithfulness? And while your acts and your tests may not be as strenuous or severe, they still test you based on your abilities. And maybe it isn't the easiest. Maybe sometimes we think of, well, I need a little bit more self-control. I don't know really how to kind of perpetuate myself, but that self-control is just simply your ability to examine your worth, and then to know who you are, and to know that, I'm not the best. I don't think that I'll ever get this thing down, and I know I need to work on this, but you let the Lord know. So now we go back to, what is your worth? Sometimes people might feel that they're not worthy. They might feel that, well, Lord, I'm just not going to be that person. And whatever it is that you have in life that you have to do, no amount of personal satisfaction, I don't even know what self-satisfaction or personal self-satisfaction is, because I've been wandering for so long. Well, let me share something with you about how we build those kinds of things and how we kind of think about those things. Now, this past week, maybe the last 2 weeks, I've been building a catapult with my granddaughter. It's a school project. Now, for teachers, right, the teacher will write out some instructions, provide some information, provide some guidelines, and say, okay, go build this thing. Now, she's going to have to take and think critically about these instructions and translate the instructions into this physical thing called a catapult. And this physical thing called a catapult has to be able to move a marshmallow so many feet. That's what she's been asked to do. But to build this thing, well, what becomes important? What becomes important is accuracy and being able to measure, learning how to miter joints and install dowels, and to strengthen those joints using that miter joint that was created. She had to learn how to drill, and that meant that you had to take the drill and go perpendicular down into a hole so that the hole isn't drilled at an angle, but it is drilled precisely at a 90-degree angle. Those are the kinds of things that she had to learn. That she knew nothing about these things until this particular thing came into existence for her. But individually, under some level of instruction, she was, I get it. And then it became, okay, let me add my own into this. So I didn't teach her anything about when you get ready to drill, making a comment of, holding the drill, and before you start it up, you count down so that anybody around you knows that this thing's getting ready to start up. So safety, move your hands out of the way, that kind of thing, right? I didn't tell her anything about that, but that was something that she developed on her own, because in her mind, that was a safety procedure that she installed. Now, I say this because that example is a similar example to our lives. By inference, there are some things that we just know that we ought to do. And whatever the degree is the ability of the person performing the act. They then may bring more or less to the table. So in other words, you may have more faith, less faith. You may have more patience, less patience. You follow what I'm saying? You may have more love, less love, but you've got it. And today, we talked about adding 1% to whatever you do on a daily basis until that thing becomes a norm for you. But I say this because I took her to Home Depot, and there happened to be the clerk that was there. And, so we say, hey, we're looking for a spring. And so the guy says, well, what kind of spring? What are you going to do with it? And blah, blah, blah. And so Ashley says, well, we need it for the catapult we're making, and we want to be able to move something from point A to point B, and I need to get something over 10 feet, blah, blah, blah. And so, the guy took us over to where the springs were. And so we looked and picked out some springs and said, okay, this is what we're going to use. Now, the guy walked away, but then he came back and said, hey, that's interesting that you guys are doing a catapult. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Well, his interest was more in the catapult and what was happening, but he also wanted to share that he was, working on his master's degree. And Ashley explained, okay, I need something to go 10 feet, and I need to do the kick out this and get the average and blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, okay, that's cool. And so he looks at me and he goes, yeah, because I did the same thing, in one of my master's classes. I had to build the catapult, but then I had to mathematically define the trajectory, the path, repeatability, reproducibility. Thank you. And I had to do all of these things and calculate all of these things mathematically. Well, all of that is true if that is the degree of the issue that you need to overcome. So sometimes in some things, we may be a novice at it, or we only have so much ability. And later on, that same thing, we may need a different level, a different ability to kind of move in. And you will find that in every single test that we talked about earlier. Every single one. Sometimes you just need to be at a certain level to deal with a certain thing. Other times, you need to have master level patience to kind of deal with some things. But what's interesting about whatever level you're at, it is what I always call a teachable moment. And sometimes you're the person that's learning. And other times, the person who is on the other end of the action is the person that is learning and who has been taught and who will take that lesson and then pass that lesson along. Now, what is important and why is that important, my beloved? It is because in heaven, if there is one person, one soul that is saved, the angels, there'll be joy in their presence for that one item. And sometimes that's all it takes, is just one person to change the course of somebody else's life. When they felt like giving up, someone else didn't give up on them. When you felt like giving up, you didn't give up on yourself. Somebody may have come along and said, hey, listen, it's not really that bad. Let me help you. Let me just work with you. Let me listen. Let me help you with what you need to deal with. Oftentimes in life, we'll deal with hidden worries, hidden hurts, things that that's kind of personal. That's kind of private. The only person that really knows anything about that is God and me. And trying to get beyond that, you spend your whole life trying to get beyond something that seems to be greater than you. And every time you test or you're tested on that thing, you look at your score and then you say, well, I'm not worthy. I didn't pass that test. And the Lord is just sitting there listening to you saying, no, actually you did pass that test because you're still here. You're still here. And at this time, I've got a greater test for you, but you needed to learn what you know now in order to pass that test that I'm putting before you, that nobody else on this earth other than you at the time I appointed can pass. You see, my beloved, you are a lot more worthy than you may think, even if you're tested. Check and clarify your worth with you. Well, check and clarify it with the Lord, because he's actually telling you that heaven will always rejoice for you when you test, and he grades and he scores your test. I thank God for you, my beloved. With that, I will pass it back over to Lynn to move us to the end of today's service.